and welcome to Your Choice 2020 General Election coverage on HOMTV. I'm Janelle James, and joining us for this candidate interview is Paul Young, Republican Congressional candidate for the 8th District. Thank you so much for joining us today. At this time, we would like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to our viewers.
Well, thanks, Janelle, and it's great to be with you today. My name is Paul Young. I spell it Junge, but I do pronounce it Young. I was born here in Michigan. I've lived in Okemos. I used to work in television news at Fox 47, as a matter of fact, and I lived in Okemos while I had that job. As I said, I was born in Michigan. My parents were born in Michigan, aunts and uncles and cousins, so I'm a real Michigander. And I'm now running for Congress in this district, which includes all of Ingham County, Livingston County, and North Oakland County. And I think my background as a former criminal prosecutor, where I worked in a domestic violence unit protecting battered women and abused children, where I worked in a small business. My dad built a business maintaining military family housing, so I have some background with small business and job creation. And as I mentioned, I'm a former television news anchor and a reporter as well. And in that role, I would go out and talk with people and listen to people. And I think all of those skills and all of those jobs have helped prepare me to be a representative for the people of Ingham County in Congress.
Thank you. Each 8th District congressional candidate will be asked a standard list of 11 questions. Let's get started with question number 1. Explain how your professional background and education make you an ideal candidate for this position.
Well, thank you for that question, Janelle. I mean, I think I covered that a little bit in my introduction of myself. I think as a former prosecutor and working in a small business, I understand some of the things that the people of the 8th District will care about. I mean, as I've been campaigning, even in this time of the coronavirus, people are very concerned about the economy and the impact that the coronavirus has had on it. I think we're going to talk about that more today, but Given my background, I think I'm well positioned to represent the people of the 8th District.
Question number 2. What do you believe are the greatest needs of the community, and what are your ideas to meet those needs, especially with uncertainties due to COVID-19?
Well, I am a first-time candidate for office, and certainly when I was contemplating this and jumping in almost a year ago now, the expectations about how the campaign would go and what the issues would be have changed. Coronavirus has been a serious issue for the country and for the state of Michigan. When I look at the death rate per 100,000, Michigan is unfortunately in the top 10 in that. And Michigan also is amongst the hardest hit economically. I think our unemployment rate's the 13th highest. So what I think we need to do, there's no getting around the fact that a big part of our economic challenge is the health challenge of coronavirus. And so I think we need to come at that with everything we've got. We need to increase testing. We need to make sure we're working as hard as we can to get a vaccine. We need to have treatments treatments for coronavirus. Because until people feel safe about it, they're not going to want to be engaging as much as we would need and want economically. So I think there's a strong desire from everyone to get back to work, get back to our lives, and do so safely. And there are things we can do economically for sure, but we also need to address the coronavirus.
Question number 3. In light of recent events surrounding police brutality and demonstrations across the nation, what is your stance on police reform in the state of Michigan?
Well, again, as a former prosecutor, I have worked extensively with sheriff's deputies, state police, city police officers, and I respect the difficult work that they have. And I think we can all have a great deal of confidence that the overwhelming majority of police officers do their jobs and they do them well. No surprise to me, even after the recent unrest around policing, when I go and talk with local law enforcement, both at the upper levels and at the day-to-day police officers, it's overwhelming that what we saw with George Floyd, people just reject, and I think that's inappropriate and it can't be allowed. And I think, unfortunately, shortly after the death of George Floyd, a poll was taken, and I think 95% of Americans expressed unhappiness and disgust about what they saw in that situation. And it seems unfortunate that a moment that really could have been and should have been a time where people came together and said, were against this type of police activity, instead seems to have created division in our society. So, look, I support police reforms. I mean, there was a bill in the U.S. Senate that had measures to increase training, increase the use of body cams, increase or improve systems around discipline and the ability to remove the few bad apple police officers that there are. And I would be supporting legislation like that because we all need police. Defunding police is absolutely not the answer. Anytime I've worked with crime victims or areas where there is a problem with crime, the cry is not for less police, it's for more police. So we can always look to improve our systems and weed out bad officers, but we need the work of good police.
Question number 4. Please comment on how you believe the state of Michigan should approach new or continued diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts.
Well, happily, we're a much better country on issues of racism and inclusion of people of all faiths, of all races, of all national backgrounds than we were 50, 60 years ago. We have laws that prohibit discrimination and require that people not be denied jobs and benefits on the basis of race, national origin, religion, and that's all to the good. And it seems to me in almost all of our public and private, I'm 54 years old. In any employer that I've had, they have wanted people of all races, of all gender, of both genders. We want people to be judged on their merit and to be judged on skill. And so, again, one of the great things about there being laws against discrimination is that when people feel they've been discriminated against, they can bring a case. And we have agencies both at the state and federal level that are there to help people who are facing those challenges. So we're not perfect, but we're certainly a society that's doing our best to eradicate those problems.
Question number 5. What are your thoughts on how Michigan can address major topics of concern, including but not limited to human trafficking, sexual assault and domestic violence, the opioid epidemic, and gun violence?
Well, again, I'm going to point to my background as a prosecutor, and I didn't prosecute, I prosecuted a number of different cases, but I specifically worked in a domestic violence unit protecting battered women and abused children. So some of those very specific topics that you talked about are ones that I have some experience with. And I think, again, the idea that we should defund the police is absolutely a terrible idea. When it comes to combating human traffic or protecting people who are suffering domestic violence issues or gun violence or any of those topics you're raising, we need police to help and be able to investigate cases and protect victims. So it's shocking to me what we see across too much of this country, where there seem to be calls to do less on those topics. I can tell the people of the 8th District, should I be elected, I will be supporting all law enforcement efforts to protect victims of all of those types of crimes.
Question number 6. What do you believe are some of the pros and cons of the current healthcare system? If elected, how would you address healthcare?
Well, I mean, of course, that's a big topic, and it's an important topic. I mean, on the pro side, I mean, there are millions of Americans who have health insurance and health coverage, and they're satisfied with that. I mean, about 120 million people get their health insurance through employer-provided insurance. Medicaid covers about 70 million people. Medicare covers another 50 million people. So that's a big part of the American population, and there are other systems that work to protect other people as well. There remain, even after the Affordable Care Act from 10 years ago, roughly 30 million, almost 30 million people who don't have health insurance. And even people who have health insurance, the challenges include the rising cost of prescription drugs and surprise medical billing. And there are absolutely things that the federal government can and should do about that. There were bills before the House that have issues to stop the drug companies from being able to game the system. Proposals that would help that would stop surprise medical billing and many of these other problems. And these are things that I would be supporting in Congress. And I guess I'd like to raise one other issue that I know is of concern to a number of people, and that is protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And that's why I've said from the beginning of my campaign that any efforts to remove those protections will be opposed by me, and that from whatever means, if those protections should go away, I will be working very hard to make sure that we reinstate and develop programs, policies, laws to protect people who have pre-existing conditions, not just to protect them from having coverage be denied, but also to make sure that any pricing of insurance coverage not be impacted by their pre-existing condition.
Question number 7. Please comment on Michigan's infrastructure.
How long do we have? Unfortunately, there's too much in Michigan that really does need improvement. And again, I can tell your viewers that should I be elected to Congress, I will be supporting federal programs to improve, to repair our highway system, to repair our bridges, and so much of our infrastructure. We need to make sure, and it's made especially clear with all the remote learning and remote working that we have with coronavirus, that we have to ensure that we have internet access for people everywhere. So it's absolutely a priority for me if I get to Washington that I will want to send federal money to help improve Michigan infrastructure.
Question number 8. Please comment on the quality of Michigan schools.
Well, I can tell you that I attended public schools myself all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. And my mom was a teacher. I have a grandfather who was an elementary school principal. So education and public schools are very much a part of my family and a part of my commitment. I think like all states, Michigan has some schools and some school districts that seem to perform at a high level and other school districts that don't perform as well. And I think we need to take a look. And while I recognize that schools and education are principally a state and local issue, and so not so much impacted at the federal government, I think we want to make sure that we are providing both the freedom for those school districts to achieve what they need to achieve, but also helping them with the resources that they need.
Question number 9. Please address the preservation of Michigan natural resources.
Hey, I've always enjoyed the great outdoors, and I will do everything I can to protect Michigan's water, Michigan's air, all of our natural resources. People love to get outdoors, and look, there's no excuse for not doing everything we can to protect the very system and the very environment that sustains all of us. It's why I support the Great Lakes Initiative and all efforts to keep out invasive species. And really anything that threatens the ecosystem and human habitability of our great state. I will absolutely preserve, protect, and defend the natural resources of our state.
Question number 10. How would you introduce or change government programs aimed at helping low-income families, senior citizens, and those with disabilities?
Well, let me address seniors first. I've made a commitment throughout this campaign that I will preserve and strengthen Medicare and Social Security, and that's a firm commitment. As for how to help folks at the low end of the income scale, I would note that the best anti-poverty program is a job. And so one thing we absolutely have to get back to is the economy that was doing so well before the coronavirus. I mean, back in February and early March, we had record low unemployment. We had incomes that were going up, especially at the low end of the income scale. So it's important that we get a vibrant job-creating economy moving again. And we talked about that a little bit earlier as it relates to addressing coronavirus, but also the economic policies of keeping a tax and regulatory environment that's low and consistent with job growth. But let's make no mistake, there's also important social safety nets. Those are programs that I support. And listen, I volunteer at a food bank down in Holt, so I know that we all have to do what we can to support those that are less fortunate.
Final question, question number 11. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing the district, and how do you plan on addressing those challenges?
Well, I think for Hazlet, for Okemos, for Meridian, just like the rest of the 8th District, the state of Michigan, and the whole country, dealing with the coronavirus is first and foremost on our minds as both a health issue and an economic issue. So as I was saying earlier, I think we've got to increase and improve testing. We've got to have a vaccine. We've got to have treatments. And truly also, we've got to combat the challenge that we see from China. We've got to make our supply chain, bring it back home, both for safety and national security reasons. We can't have prescription drugs being made exclusively there. We can't have our medical equipment, our personal protective equipment made there. We need to have it here in the United States. First and foremost for a health and national security reason, but also for economic reasons. So we've got to address the coronavirus. We need to make sure we can get people safely back to work, and those would be my priorities in Washington.
At this time, we have finished the standard list of questions with Paul Young, Republican congressional candidate for 8th District. We have about 10 minutes remaining. Would you be open to a couple follow-up questions, or we can discuss any other topic of your choosing?
No, I'm happy to take any other questions that you might have.
My first follow-up question is in regard to resources. You mentioned that we should provide more resources for Michigan schools. What exact resources are you referring to, and how would you provide those resources if elected?
Well, as I noted, I mean, education has been and should continue to be primarily a state and local issue. The federal government has never been a principal player in either establishing how education should be provided or in funding for it. And I think it's best that it continue that way. When I said it should have the resources, I'm confident that that local school boards and that local officials can make those decisions. The federal government can provide and supplement some resources, and I'm specifically talking about money. I mean, that's the main thing that comes from Washington. So, I don't have a specific dollar figure to suggest or offer, but where it's appropriate, the federal government can and should, provide some additional supplemental funding because education is just that important, and we need to support it.
My second follow-up question is in regards to your stance on protecting senior citizens. So are you opposed to raising the age for retirement, or are you for raising the age for retirement?
Well, look, I have said that I'm going to preserve and strengthen both Social Security and Medicare, and that's going to require any number of different things that should be done. And I think what's going to be important with either of those programs is that it be done on a bipartisan basis. I mean, these are programs that have existed for my entire lifetime, and on Social Security, it's been, I think, 80, 85 years now. And the idea that one party or one legislator all by himself or herself would have a blueprint for exactly what should be done, I think it's just not realistic. So, certainly the life expectancy of Americans is much higher today than it was 50, 60 years ago. That could be part of the mix. But I won't say now that I will or that I won't do that. I would just say, but I would add one other comment about it, and that is, whatever we do with Social Security or Medicare, it should not impact people already currently in the system or people just about to enter the system, because they've already made life plans and they're counting on that. If any changes are made, they have to be made so that there's at least 10, 15 years for people to react to any changes.
Now, you mentioned that the United States is more accepting and diverse than it was 50 or 60 years ago. But many marginalized communities are protesting and fighting for some of the same things that they were 50 and 60 years ago, including but not limited to mass incarceration, police brutality, and discrimination or systematic racism. How do you combat that?
Well, look, the comments I were making earlier is that I do think America is a great country, and I think the ideals of our country are worth fighting for and improving upon. And just to take one of the examples you mentioned there, to talk about police brutality. I mean, happily, I think the last year statistics were available was 2018, and only 20 people died in police custody. Now, of course, that's 20 people too many. But the idea that this is a pervasive problem, or that it's something that's just completely out of control, I think the statistics, fortunately, don't match up with that. And it's also interesting to note that it's not as though, as often gets discussed, this is a problem that's uniquely with one party or one president. I mean, unfortunately, we can point to instances where people have died in police custody, during the Obama administration, it's not a unique problem. It's not a new problem, but fortunately, it's not a problem that is so widespread that it shocks the conscience. I mean, when you see what happened to George Floyd, I think that shocked everyone. And so in particular instances, we absolutely see that it's wrong. But happily, as I think I mentioned earlier, a poll I saw shortly after George Floyd's death said that 95% of Americans thought that was wrong. So there's widespread agreement around the country that we want policing that does not lead to death while people are in custody. And so we can work towards improving on that. And that's why I talked about things like police body cams, like more training, like better systems for discipline and removal of officers. I mean, again, to take the George Floyd example, the particular officer who was involved in that incident, there had been many incidences before. And so if we'd had a system that did a better job of disciplining and removing that officer, he may not have been on the job that day, and George Floyd might very well be alive.
With the very few minutes remaining, we would like to give you this time to make a closing statement.
Well, thank you, Janelle, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to talk with your viewers in Hazlet, Okemos, and Meridian. One of the commitments I've made as I've campaigned is that my commitment, should I be elected and sent to Washington, is that I will listen to the voters of the 8th District, and I will work on your priorities. And those priorities are things we've talked about today: defeating the coronavirus, getting the economy back up on its feet, because I know when people are worried about their job or have been laid off, that is a major problem for them. So we need to focus on getting back to work safely. We need to defend good policing and make sure that we have communities that people feel safe living and working in. And those are my commitments. I'll listen and I'll work for you.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this candidate interview with Paul Young, Republican congressional candidate for the 8th District. I'm Janelle James, inviting you to watch live general election night coverage on Tuesday, November 3rd, right here on HOMTV. Thanks for watching.